It had been just another Sunday in Brentwood, or at least, that's what anyone would have assumed if they hadn't known what would unfold behind the iron gates of a $13.5 million estate that had once symbolized Hollywood glamour and family success. The Reiner home, an architectural statement of elegance, nestled amid palm trees and manicured gardens, was more than a property. It was a fortress of memories, laughter, and in the coming hours, unimaginable horror. By Sunday evening, it would become the epicenter of a story that no one in Los Angeles, or the world, could ignore. Rob Reiner, the legendary director whose films had shaped decades of cinematic storytelling, and his wife, Michelle Singer Reiner, a talented and celebrated photographer, were found dead inside that very home. And standing at the center of this tragedy was their son, Nick Reiner, 32, who lived just steps away in the guest house. A residence that would suddenly become synonymous with suspicion, accusation, and questions that the world was desperate to answer. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. Imagine the scene. The doors to the main house quietly open, the polished floors reflecting the afternoon sun, and then the discovery. The bodies. The chaos that ensued. Family members rushing in, hearts pounding, hoping against hope that this was some misunderstanding. But it wasn't. The Los Angeles County Medical Examiner would later confirm what no one wanted to believe. Multiple sharp force injuries, homicide, a date of death precisely pinned to that Sunday, December 14th. Every detail was meticulous, every timeline scrutinized, yet the world couldn't help but focus on one haunting, almost surreal image. Nick Reiner, the son, the one who allegedly committed the unthinkable, standing in court when his life sentence was announced. He asked for a moment. And then, he said nothing. Nothing. How does a man, 32 years old, confronted with the absolute finality of a life sentence, simply remain silent? What thoughts ran through his mind in those seconds of pause, in that almost imperceptible hesitation? Millions have replayed the viral clip, dissecting every flicker of expression, every twitch of a finger, as though the answer might be hidden in the silence itself. It's a moment that seems to defy explanation, a moment that simultaneously draws in curiosity and chills the blood. And it's just the beginning of a story that twists through fame, family, and tragedy in ways that almost feel too surreal to be real. Rob Reiner's career alone makes this story headline-worthy. From directing classics to influencing generations of filmmakers, his name carries weight in every corner of Hollywood. Michelle, his wife, was equally remarkable. Not just as an artist capturing the essence of people and moments, but as a partner who had supported and shaped a household that many envied. Their lives, public and private, appeared polished, curated, impeccable. The glimmering surface of celebrity and accomplishment, however, often hides complexities, pressures, and relationships that outsiders can only guess at. And when those layers are stripped away by a violent act, the contrast is staggering. For the Reiner family, the initial shock of discovery wasn't just a headline. It was a private catastrophe amplified by the scrutiny of the world. Romy, their daughter, discovered the scene after noticing something was wrong. The intuition, the fear, the dreadful walk through the halls to find that her parents were gone. Every step, every heartbeat, echoing in the corridors of the estate that had been home. And in the aftermath, the law moved swiftly. Nick was arrested within hours. Charges were filed. 2 counts of first-degree murder, the use of a dangerous weapon, a knife. The guest house he had called home became, overnight, a crime scene of intense scrutiny. This story matters, and not just because of the Reiners' fame or wealth. It matters because it cuts into the fabric of what we assume about family, trust, and the extremes of human behavior. What drives a son to allegedly murder his parents? How does a family's inner life unravel to the point that tragedy becomes inevitable? And what does it say about justice, accountability, and the human capacity for silence in the face of unthinkable consequences? These are the questions that grip audiences, that compel people to click, watch, and analyze every moment as if somehow the answer is just a few frames away. In the coming chapters, we will dive into the Reiner family's history, explore the timeline of the fatal Sunday, and unravel the viral courtroom moment that has fascinated millions. We will examine Nick's upbringing, his relationships with both parents, and the environment in which he was raised, a life of privilege, expectations, and pressures that may have contributed, in ways we can only speculate, to the catastrophic events of December 14th. We will analyze the official findings of the Los Angeles County Medical Examiner, the evidence collected, and the inconsistencies, the contradictions, and the subtle clues that might shed light on a night that changed everything. And we will confront the most haunting aspect of all, the silence of a son when confronted with his sentence. That single moment, viral and dissected, is not just a reflection of the man. It is a mirror held up to the audience, forcing us to ask, how would we respond? How do we process grief, guilt, and the weight of our actions when everything we've known and loved has been shattered? But even as the questions mount, there is more to this story than the immediate shock. The viral video, the media frenzy, the social media speculation, these are the surface ripples of a much deeper narrative. Beneath it lies the complexity of family dynamics, the hidden pressures of Hollywood life, and the chilling reality that sometimes the most shocking acts are committed not by strangers, but by those we trust most. Every detail we will explore is a piece of a puzzle, every revelation a key to understanding a tragedy that seems almost cinematic in its horror. So as we begin this journey into the events surrounding Nick Reiner, the death of Rob and Michelle Reiner, and the viral courtroom moment that has captured global attention, keep this question in mind. How do ordinary lives, even those cloaked in fame and fortune, unravel in ways that seem both inevitable and inexplicable? By the end of this story, the answers may still be partially hidden, but what you will discover will challenge everything you thought you knew about family, trust, and the shadows that can hide behind the brightest lights. And yet, despite all the evidence, the media coverage, and the viral videos, one fact remains undeniable. The moment Nick Reiner stood in that courtroom, asked for a moment, and then said nothing, he held the attention of the world. What went through his mind? What did he feel? The questions hang in the air, unanswered, as we step into the depths of a story that has already shocked Hollywood and will continue to shock the world. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Everyone knows Rob Reiner, the filmmaker. The name conjures images of classic movies, unforgettable lines, and decades of Hollywood acclaim. But what do we really know about the man behind the camera? The man who stepped out of the spotlight long enough to nurture a family, to build a life that seemed enviable, almost untouchable. The Reiner family, in public, projected the picture of success, wealth, talent, connections, influence. But behind the smiles and the red carpet appearances, there existed a story few outsiders could ever see. A story of ambition, expectation, and relationships that, beneath the surface, may have been far more fragile than anyone imagined. Rob Reiner's rise in Hollywood was meteoric. From his early acting days on All in the Family to directing iconic films that became cultural landmarks, he was a figure of authority, creativity, and respect. Films like This Is Spinal Tap, When Harry Met Sally, and A Few Good Men didn't just entertain. They cemented his reputation as a storyteller who understood the nuances of human behavior. And yet, despite the public adulation, Rob Reiner was, by many accounts, a man who carried his own pressures in private. The stakes of success, the constant scrutiny of Hollywood, and the weight of maintaining a family legacy are pressures that often manifest in ways unseen. Michelle Singer Reiner was no less remarkable. As a photographer, she captured moments that spoke to the soul, balancing the artistry of the lens with the daily responsibilities of a household that could easily overwhelm anyone. The marriage between Rob and Michelle, by most accounts, was a partnership of equals, creative, supportive, and seemingly unbreakable. They raised 2 children, Romy and Nick, in a world that combined the glamour of Los Angeles with the insularity of private family life. But as with many families, the public image is only the tip of the iceberg. Inside the Reiner household, dynamics were layered, complicated, and at times, tense. Romy, the daughter, had long navigated the intersection of public expectation and private grief, balancing a love for her parents with the awareness that the world was watching. Nick, the son, lived in the guest house, a separate space, a buffer from the main house. yet physically close enough to be intimately entwined with the family's daily life. To an outsider, this might seem idyllic. To insiders, it may have signaled subtle divisions, patterns of behavior, or even friction that would, decades later, culminate in tragedy. Family life is rarely simple, no matter the fortune or fame. Sibling rivalries, parental expectations, and the quiet struggles that accompany the pressures of living in the shadow of greatness can plant seeds of tension long before they manifest in crisis. For Nick, growing up in a household of high achievers could have been a source of inspiration, or it could have been suffocating. The stories of his childhood suggest a blend of privilege and expectation. Holidays spent in lavish homes, exposure to elite circles, access to opportunities that most could only dream of, and yet, a sense of isolation that wealth sometimes brings. Was there resentment? Frustration? Moments that hinted at the cracks forming in a family that appeared seamless from the outside? These are questions that historians, psychologists, and journalists alike ponder, attempting to piece together a life that seemed ordinary in its love, yet extraordinary in its context. Publicly, the Reiners were the picture of Hollywood royalty. But privately, they navigated the same challenges as countless families, magnified by fame. Decisions about schooling, career paths, relationships, and independence all played out under a spotlight that could amplify minor tensions into monumental pressures. For Nick, the guest house was both a sanctuary and a separation, a physical representation of his position within the family. Close enough to witness daily life, yet distant enough to experience both autonomy and isolation. The dynamics between him and his parents, and between him and his sister Romy, would become critical in understanding the events of December 14th. To understand the full gravity of what unfolded, one must examine not only the public personas but the private interactions, the late-night arguments, the whispered frustrations, the subtle indications that something was amiss. Family friends and insiders, speaking anonymously, describe a household filled with love, yes, but also with the unspoken pressures that accompany wealth, status, and expectation. Could these pressures have contributed to a fracture, a tipping point, that would ultimately erupt in unimaginable violence? The answer is complicated, layered, and, as with many tragedies, tinged with the cruel irony that those who seem safest are often most vulnerable. It is also important to consider the environment itself. The Brentwood estate, sprawling and luxurious, a place designed for comfort and privacy, but also a place where one could disappear into solitude. The very features that made it a sanctuary for a high-profile family may also have facilitated the moments that led to disaster. Separate entrances, multiple wings, and the physical separation of the guest house all played roles in creating a dynamic of proximity and distance, intimacy and detachment, access and isolation. In the end, these architectural choices, seemingly mundane, became an unwitting part of the story, a setting in which tragedy could occur almost unnoticed until it was too late. As we examine the Reiner family, it becomes clear that fame and fortune do not inoculate anyone against tragedy. In fact, they often amplify the consequences. Expectations, scrutiny, and the intense pressures of maintaining appearances can intensify the fragility of even the strongest bonds. The Reiner's story, while horrifying in its specifics, is a reminder that human complexity is universal, that the combination of circumstance, personality, and environment can converge in ways that are both shocking and inevitable in hindsight. And yet, despite decades of observation, interviews, and public appearances, one central question remains unanswered. How did a family so seemingly perfect, so outwardly unassailable, descend into a scenario that resulted in murder and devastation? What were the warning signs? Could anyone have seen it coming? And crucially, what does this say about the son who now stands accused, facing life imprisonment, his actions forever altering the narrative of a family once admired by millions? As we prepare to move from history and context to the pivotal events of that fateful Sunday, keep this in mind. Understanding the Reiner family is not about speculation for speculation's sake. It is about grasping the delicate balance between love and expectation, privilege and isolation, public image and private reality. Only by recognizing these layers can we begin to comprehend the enormity of what occurred, and why the reaction of Nick Reiner, when faced with his sentence, resonates so profoundly with the public. But what happened on that Sunday? The discovery of the bodies, the immediate arrest, and the first shocking reactions, is what transforms history into tragedy. It is the moment when the world's curiosity meets the stark, unvarnished reality of a family destroyed from within. And that, as we will see, is only the beginning. Because what came next, the viral reaction, the courtroom silence, the unfolding investigation, would not only captivate the world but force everyone to confront uncomfortable truths about family, justice, and the fragility of human relationships. But the events of that Sunday were only the opening act. What Nick did in the immediate hours after the discovery, the decisions made in the guest house, and the initial interactions with law enforcement would all set the stage for a story that is far from over, and the world was only just beginning to watch. And then, a single action, seemingly small, would ignite global fascination. Nick Reiner asking for a moment in court and saying nothing. It was a Sunday like any other, or so it seemed. The sun rose over Brentwood, casting a golden light on manicured lawns, palm trees swaying gently in the breeze, and the imposing gates of the Reiner estate standing tall and serene. From the outside, everything looked perfect, almost picturesque, the kind of day where nothing bad could happen. But appearances, as they often do, were cruelly deceiving. Inside the sprawling mansion, the atmosphere was already heavy with a tension invisible to the casual observer, a tension that would culminate in a tragedy so shocking that the world would struggle to comprehend it. The morning began quietly. Neighbors, accustomed to the Reiner's presence, noted the usual activity, the gentle hum of household staff, the occasional arrival of a car, the faint sound of music drifting from the estate. But as the hours passed, the routine normality began to fracture. Romy, the daughter, noticed subtle irregularities, a silence where there should have been conversation, a door left slightly ajar, a car in the driveway that shouldn't have been there. Her instincts, honed by a lifetime of awareness in a high-profile household, began to tingle with unease. By mid-morning, her concern escalated into fear. Calls went unanswered. The gentle knock on her parents' door yielded no reply. Every unanswered phone call, every quiet room, amplified her anxiety. Romy's decision to investigate further was swift, almost instinctual. She walked through the halls of the main house, her heart pounding with each step, each creak of the floorboards echoing in her ears. The scene she encountered would be seared into her memory forever. The lifeless bodies of her parents, the evidence of a violent and brutal attack, and the realization that her world had just been irrevocably shattered. The discovery was immediately followed by a whirlwind of action. Emergency services were called, and first responders arrived to a scene of horror. The Los Angeles Police Department secured the estate, documenting every detail, every piece of evidence, every potential clue that might explain how a family so seemingly stable had fallen victim to such violence. The air was thick with tension, a mixture of shock, grief, and the unrelenting questions that follow in the wake of a violent death. Why, how, and by whom? Nick Reiner, the son, was at the guest house when the bodies were discovered. From that moment forward, his life would become intertwined with suspicion and accusation. Law enforcement, acting swiftly, questioned him, assessed the scene, and began the meticulous process of piecing together a timeline of events. The investigation moved rapidly, fueled by the high-profile nature of the victims and the severity of the crime. The estate, once a symbol of luxury and security, was now a crime scene, each room a potential repository of answers, each object a piece of a complex and horrifying puzzle. The initial hours following the discovery were marked by confusion and speculation. Neighbors described unusual activity, cars coming and going, officers and detectives arriving in rapid succession, a sense that the normal rhythm of life had been violently interrupted. Media outlets, alerted almost instantly, began to report, sometimes speculating, sometimes confirming, the grim details. The world watched as the Reiner estate transformed from a haven of family life into the epicenter of one of Hollywood's most shocking tragedies. Autopsy reports would later confirm the brutality of the act. Multiple sharp force injuries, homicide as the manner of death, precise timing placing the deaths on December 14th. The thoroughness of the medical examiner's findings left little room for doubt regarding the severity and violence of the incident. Yet, even as forensic science laid bare the mechanics of the crime, the human questions remained unanswered. What drove this act? Why did it happen in a household so seemingly ordinary, yet so extraordinary in its social and familial context? The world was gripped by the shocking reality. A family renowned for its contributions to art, culture, and society had been torn apart from within. And at the center of the storm was Nick Reiner, whose immediate reaction to the discovery would set the tone for the public's fascination. Arrested later that same day, charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, and facing the use of a dangerous weapon, Nick became the embodiment of the questions the world desperately sought to answer. His life, once one of relative privacy in the guest house, was now public property, dissected in headlines, analyzed in viral clips, and speculated upon by millions. In those first hours, as the investigation unfolded, details emerged slowly but steadily. Police released preliminary reports, confirming the identities of the victims, the cause of death, and the rapidity with which law enforcement had acted. The narrative, grim and unrelenting, began to take shape. A Sunday that started like any other had ended in horror, leaving behind grief, unanswered questions, and a global audience struggling to comprehend the unthinkable. And yet, even as the facts were laid bare, gaps remained. The timeline, the motives, and the inner workings of the family were shrouded in mystery. What had Nick been doing in the hours leading up to the discovery? Were there warning signs, subtle cues, or tensions that hinted at the violence to come? The answers, as always, would be pieced together slowly, meticulously, through interviews, forensic analysis, and the painstaking work of investigators committed to uncovering the truth. But the human element, the shock, the grief, the reaction of a family suddenly reduced to fragments, cannot be overstated. Romy's bravery in discovering the scene, the emotional turmoil of the household staff, the neighbors' reactions, all added layers of complexity to an already unfathomable event. Every eyewitness account, every statement made to law enforcement, contributed to the emerging narrative, one of a day that started with promise and ended in irrevocable tragedy. And then there was the moment that would captivate the world. Nick Reiner, arrested and brought before the authorities, confronted with the enormity of what had happened. His reaction, initially private, would later become a viral moment of silence, pause, and questions without answers. The world would replay the scene countless times, searching for meaning, judgment, or insight into the mind of a man who, by all accounts, had lost his parents in the most violent of circumstances, and who now faced a future defined by that act. As the day of the tragedy came to a close, law enforcement secured the estate, media coverage escalated, and social media began its relentless dissemination of images, statements, and speculation. The Reiner estate, once a place of family life and Hollywood prestige, had become a symbol of tragedy, fascination, and a story that the public could not look away from. But what happened next? Nick's arrest, his initial statements, and the first interactions in custody would set the tone for the viral moment that would dominate headlines and social media feeds alike. The world had witnessed the discovery of a brutal crime. But it was the human reactions, the choices made in those first hours, and the silence that followed, that would define the narrative for weeks, months, and perhaps years to come. And in the midst of all this chaos, one fact remained chillingly clear. A Sunday that began with sunlight, laughter, and normalcy had ended in blood, grief, and questions that no one, not even the investigators, not even the family, could answer immediately. But what came next, in those critical hours between the discovery and the viral courtroom moment, would change the story entirely, and no one saw it coming. 32 years old, living in the guest house of the very parents he allegedly ended, Nick Reiner's life, once a story of relative obscurity compared to the towering public presence of Rob Reiner, would now be thrust under an unrelenting spotlight. From the outside, he was the son of Hollywood royalty, a man with privileges most could only imagine. Access to wealth, education, and networks that opened doors few could approach. But privileges alone cannot insulate anyone from the complexities of family, the pressures of expectation, or the dark spirals of isolation, frustration, and unspoken tension. To understand the magnitude of what happened, we must first understand Nick, not as a criminal, but as a human being shaped by a lifetime of circumstances. Childhood accounts suggest a life of contrasts. Affection intertwined with high expectations, luxury paired with scrutiny, independence shadowed by the looming presence of accomplished parents. Growing up, Nick had been afforded opportunities to travel, to study, and to explore his interests, yet in the quiet moments of adolescence, there were whispers of tension, perhaps the subtle friction that often exists between parents and children whose paths diverge from familial ideals. Friends and acquaintances describe him as private, introspective, occasionally distant. He was not outwardly hostile or aggressive in public settings, yet behind closed doors, those who interacted closely with him noted a complexity that could be misunderstood, or worse, ignored until it escalated. Every family has its conflicts, but the Reiners were magnified by the unique pressures of their world. Hollywood is not a forgiving environment, nor is it a gentle one for children raised in its orbit. Success, fame, and legacy can cast long shadows, and even the most nurturing households sometimes hide fractures that only emerge under extreme stress. Nick's relationship with his parents was, by all outward appearances, close. He shared familial holidays, attended milestone events, and maintained the kind of proximity that suggested trust and affection. Yet, the guest house he called home was a physical manifestation of both connection and separation, close enough to be part of the family, but distant enough to create boundaries, intentional or otherwise. That physical separation, paired with psychological and emotional distance, may have contributed to a dynamic that would eventually explode into tragedy. By the time of December 14th, Nick's life was quietly routine but layered with complexity. He moved between the guest house and the main estate, navigating interactions with parents and sister, managing personal routines, and existing in a world of both comfort and expectation. To outsiders, this might have seemed mundane, even idyllic. But for those attuned to the subtleties of human behavior, the tensions inherent in such a household were palpable. Small disagreements, moments of frustration, and unspoken resentments can fester over years, and in the context of Nick's upbringing, these dynamics would become tragically relevant. When the bodies of Rob and Michelle Reiner were discovered, Nick's position shifted instantly from son to suspect. The law, swift and methodical, placed him at the center of the investigation. Arrested that same evening, charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder and the use of a dangerous weapon, Nick's life was irrevocably altered in mere hours. From private citizen to accused murderer, the transition was both rapid and absolute. Every decision he made in those moments, every statement or silence, would be scrutinized by investigators, the public, and the media. It is worth examining the psychological and social pressures that accompany such a transformation. Being accused of a crime, particularly one as severe and public as the alleged murder of one's parents, carries a weight few can comprehend. There is the immediate shock, the fear, the overwhelming awareness that one's every word, gesture, and expression will be analyzed. For Nick, who had lived a life of relative privacy despite his family's fame, this sudden exposure was extraordinary. Every movement was captured, every reaction interpreted, and every silence debated. In the first hours following his arrest, law enforcement conducted interviews, documented movements, and began the painstaking process of reconstructing events leading up to the tragedy. Investigators pieced together evidence from the estate, the guest house, and the interactions between family members. What they found would form the basis of charges that now define Nick's existence: premeditation, use of a dangerous weapon, and first-degree murder. Each legal term carries not just practical implications, but psychological ones, painting a picture of an accused individual whose actions are both criminal and deeply consequential. Public fascination with Nick Reiner's story cannot be overstated. Here was a man who had lived largely outside the spotlight, suddenly at the center of a narrative that captivated millions. Social media erupted, News outlets churned out headlines, and ordinary people debated his character, motives, and potential guilt. In many ways, the world was trying to reconcile the person they saw in viral photos and videos with the unimaginable act alleged by investigators. How could someone raised in comfort, in a family defined by love and opportunity, commit such violence? What does it reveal about human behavior, family dynamics, and the unseen struggles that can simmer beneath the surface? Even as the investigation progressed, patterns of behavior in Nick's life were scrutinized. Friends, acquaintances, and family members offered insights, painting a picture of a young man navigating a complex environment with both privilege and pressure. Some described him as introverted, struggling with emotional regulation. Others highlighted his independence, noting his ability to navigate the world alone. The duality of these descriptions reflects the multifaceted nature of human personality, particularly in high-pressure environments where success, expectation, and isolation intersect. And then came the viral courtroom moment. In the hours and days following his arrest, Nick Reiner appeared before a judge, facing the life sentence that would define the rest of his life. The world watched as he asked for a moment, paused, and then remained silent. That silence, magnified by the media, became symbolic, a reflection of shock, guilt, defiance, confusion, or some combination of emotions that only he could fully understand. Millions replayed the clip, searching for clues in the way he shifted his weight, the look in his eyes, the subtle tension in his hands. Every minute of silence was dissected, analyzed, and debated. And yet, it offered no answers, only questions that deepened the fascination surrounding him. Nick Reiner's story is, at its core, a tragic study in contrasts: wealth and isolation, public admiration and private turmoil, love and violence. His transformation from son to suspect illustrates the fragile boundaries that exist within families, the pressures that can accumulate over time, and the unpredictable ways in which human behavior can manifest. Understanding him requires not only examination of his actions, but empathy for the complexities of growing up in a household where expectations are high, scrutiny is constant, and privacy is rare. But even with all the investigation, all the evidence, and all the public scrutiny, one question remains chillingly simple and impossibly complex. Why? Why did this happen? What drove a son, raised in comfort and love, to allegedly commit an act that destroyed the family he was part of? And what does it say about the human mind, the weight of expectations, and the pressures that can lead someone down a path of irreversible decisions? These questions, however, are just the beginning. Because what Nick did in the immediate aftermath, the choices he made, the interactions with law enforcement, and the subtle cues captured on video, would ignite the viral moment that the world could not stop watching. His silence in court, the minute-long pause, was only the first public glimpse of a complex, layered, and deeply tragic story. And as we move into the viral courtroom moment itself, one thing becomes clear. Nick Reiner is no longer just a son, a private individual, or a member of a famous family. He is the focal point of a narrative that examines not only the act itself, but the human reactions, the societal fascination, and the moral questions that surround a tragedy of this scale. But what came next, what the world would see in that courtroom, what would be captured in viral clips, and how it would define public perception, was something no one could have predicted, and it would leave millions questioning everything they thought they knew about guilt, remorse, and the silence of a man facing the unthinkable. It was a moment that would freeze time on the internet. 1 minute, the world was digesting the news of the Reiner tragedy. The next, Nick Reiner appeared in court, and everything changed. The courtroom, a place of measured procedure and solemnity, became the stage for a viral moment that would be replayed, dissected, and debated across every social media platform. The attention wasn't on the legal arguments, the judge, or the prosecution. It was on the accused, a son facing life imprisonment, asking for a single moment, and then saying nothing. The video surfaced almost instantly. In that short clip, viewers could see Nick rise from his seat, shoulders tense, eyes flicking between the judge, his attorney, and the gallery. He asked quietly for a moment, the words nearly swallowed by the hum of the courtroom. Then he paused. Time seemed to stretch. Seconds ticked by in silence. each one magnified by the knowledge of what had transpired. 2 lives lost, a family destroyed, and the public watching every gesture, every expression, every breath. What was he thinking? Shock? Regret? Defiance? Fear? The ambiguity of that pause became the focal point of worldwide fascination. Legal analysts, psychologists, and armchair observers all tried to decipher the meaning behind the silence. Some suggested a calculated attempt to appear composed. Others argued it was genuine paralysis, a human response to the immensity of his situation. And yet, no definitive answer emerged. The silence itself became the statement, louder than any words could have been. In the hours that followed, the clip spread like wildfire. Millions of views, thousands of shares, and endless commentary flooded every corner of the internet. Memes appeared, social media threads debated the nuances of his posture and facial expression, and news outlets dissected every detail frame by frame. 1 second of video became a global conversation, raising questions that went far beyond courtroom procedure. How does a person face the enormity of a life sentence? How do we interpret silence in the context of guilt, grief, and human psychology? Courtroom experts weighed in. They explained that asking for a moment is a legal and procedural allowance, a pause to collect oneself before responding. But in Nick's case, that pause took on an almost mythic quality. It wasn't just a pause. It was a performance, intentional or not, that encapsulated the horror, the disbelief, and the incomprehensibility of the events leading up to that day. Lawyers emphasized that every gesture in court can be scrutinized, sometimes unfairly, and in Nick's situation, the stakes were unprecedented. Public perception, fueled by viral media, would interpret his silence in ways no legal argument could fully control. Psychologists offered additional insight, exploring the human response to extreme stress and guilt. In moments of overwhelming pressure, the mind can shut down, creating a blankness that appears deliberate but is actually instinctive. Nick's body language, his hesitations, the subtle tension in his hands and shoulders, all were classic signs of someone confronting life-altering news. Yet the public, desperate for clarity, sought meaning in every micro-expression, every fraction of a second. The silence became a mirror, reflecting collective curiosity, fear, and judgment. Meanwhile, the legal team worked behind the scenes to navigate the complexities of high-profile media scrutiny. Every statement, every motion, every procedural request had to be carefully managed. The viral moment complicated matters further. Defense attorneys emphasized the importance of privacy and context, reminding the world that a courtroom is not a stage for performance, but a place for justice. But in the court of public opinion, the clip had already taken on a life of its own, independent of legal considerations. The media frenzy was relentless. News anchors replayed the moment repeatedly, analyzing body language, hypothesizing motives, and interviewing experts who offered varying interpretations. Social media users dissected each frame, debating whether the silence signaled remorse, arrogance, or shock. The viral clip became a touchstone for discussions about crime, family tragedy, and human behavior under pressure. It was impossible to look away. The world was captivated by the pause, the moment, the quiet that said everything without a single word. And yet, as viral as the moment was, it also highlighted contradictions. Nick, the son, had been charged with a heinous act, yet in court, his silence humanized him in unexpected ways. Millions of viewers found themselves grappling with empathy, judgment, and fascination simultaneously. The tension between guilt and humanity, accusation and identity, became palpable. The courtroom moment was more than a news story. It was a window into the complexities of human emotion and the incomprehensibility of tragedy. Experts cautioned against jumping to conclusions. They noted that silence can be strategic, emotional, or even instinctual. In Nick's case, the ambiguity created space for speculation, which in turn amplified the virality of the moment. The interplay between public curiosity and private trauma became starkly apparent. The world wanted answers, yet the answers may never fully align with perception. As the video circulated, it began influencing other aspects of the case. Public opinion, media coverage, and social discourse were shaped by that single minute of silence. The narrative of Nick Reiner, already complicated by family dynamics and legal charges, became inseparable from the viral moment. It was no longer only about the facts of the case. It was about interpretation, perception, and the collective need to find meaning in chaos. The viral courtroom reaction also sparked deeper conversations about family tragedy in the public eye. Commentators reflected on how a family's private suffering becomes a spectacle, how grief and guilt are scrutinized, and how social media accelerates the transformation of personal moments into public obsession. For the Reiner family, the human cost was immense. Romy's grief, the devastation of close friends, and the horror experienced by staff and neighbors were compounded by the knowledge that millions were witnessing and analyzing their pain. And as the world debated, dissected, and speculated, one undeniable truth remained. That single minute, Nick Reiner asking for a moment and saying nothing, had become emblematic of the entire tragedy. It captured shock, grief, guilt, and the unknowable complexities of human emotion in a way that words alone could never achieve. The viral moment was not just a clip. It was a lens through which millions of people tried, and failed, to understand an unimaginable act. But the courtroom moment, as significant as it was only one piece of a much larger puzzle. Behind the viral video lay the events of that day, the details of the crime scene, and the forensic evidence that investigators painstakingly gathered. What happened in the estate, what clues were uncovered, and how the law approached Nick Reiner's actions would add layers of complexity to a story that was already gripping the world. And yet, even with all the analysis, the experts, and the viral attention, one question remained hauntingly simple. What was going through Nick's mind during that pause? Was it regret, defiance, fear, or a combination of all three? The answer, locked away behind his silence, would remain a source of speculation, fascination, and emotional intensity as the investigation unfolded. But what came next, the revelations from the crime scene, the forensic reports, and the first official findings, would reveal details so shocking, so intricate, that even the viral courtroom moment would be seen in a new light. The world thought it understood Nick Reiner's reaction, but the story was far from over, and what came next would change everything. The gates of the Reiner estate, once symbols of luxury and security, had become barriers to the outside world's gaze, enclosing within them a crime scene that investigators would treat with painstaking care. Every inch of the Brentwood mansion and its adjoining guest house would be examined, photographed, and documented. Nothing could be left to chance, no footprint, no blood spatter, no subtle detail overlooked. In moments like these, forensic teams operate like archaeologists, piecing together evidence to reconstruct a day that had ended in tragedy. From the moment law enforcement arrived, the air was charged with tension. Detectives moved methodically through the home, noting the layout, entrances, and exits, the positions of furniture, and the locations of personal belongings. For outsiders, the crime scene might have appeared sterile, clinical, almost detached from the human suffering that had occurred there. But for those investigating, every detail screamed stories of violence, movement, and final moments. Each piece of evidence had the potential to reveal motive, sequence, or intent. And in a case as high-profile as this, the stakes were enormous. The bodies of Rob and Michelle Reiner were discovered in the main residence, their lives violently ended by multiple sharp force injuries. The medical examiner would later categorize the manner of death as homicide, confirming the worst fears of investigators, family, and neighbors alike. The brutality of the act, combined with the intimate setting of a family home, painted a picture of horror that few could reconcile. But for the forensic team, horror was secondary to meticulous analysis. Every blood pattern, every object displaced, every potential weapon was documented to construct an accurate reconstruction of events. Nick Reiner's presence in the guest house added a complex layer to the investigation. Law enforcement had to consider proximity, opportunity, and motive simultaneously. The guest house was not merely a separate structure. It was part of the family ecosystem, connected both physically and emotionally to the main residence. Investigators needed to understand his movements, his interactions with his parents, and the timeline that led to the fatal confrontation. Interviews, witness statements, and surveillance footage, if available, became crucial to understanding the sequence of events. One of the most critical elements of any homicide investigation is the preservation of evidence. Detectives and forensic specialists worked in tandem, documenting blood spatter patterns, knife wounds, and the placement of objects that might indicate a struggle. The layout of the rooms, the direction of each injury, and even the minor disarray of personal items could reveal critical insights into what had transpired. In high-profile cases, the integrity of evidence is paramount. Any oversight could compromise the prosecution or leave lingering doubts in the public consciousness. Beyond the physical evidence, investigators also considered psychological and behavioral clues. The interactions of family members, the dynamics within the home, and the subtle signs of tension or conflict were all scrutinized. Forensic psychologists often collaborate with law enforcement to interpret these patterns, attempting to understand not just what happened, but why. In the case of the Reiners, the combination of wealth, fame, and family complexity created a unique investigative challenge. The public and private lives were intertwined, and the narrative was as much about human behavior as it was about physical evidence. Neighbors and friends played a crucial role as well. Their observations, seemingly minor at the time, cars parked unusually, unusual sounds, or sudden quiet, became vital pieces of the puzzle. Each statement was carefully corroborated against forensic findings, constructing a timeline that could place individuals in specific locations at critical moments. In tragedies like this, the smallest detail can make the difference between clarity and ambiguity, between justice served and questions left unanswered. The crime scene investigation also revealed subtle contradictions that intrigued both law enforcement and the public. Certain areas of the home appeared undisturbed, while others bore evidence of struggle. Items that might have been expected to provide clues were either missing, moved, or intentionally altered. These contradictions fueled early speculation, both in media coverage and among amateur sleuths online, highlighting the tension between observable fact and interpretation. Forensic teams also turned their attention to the weapon itself, the knife used in the attacks. Analysis focused on fingerprints, DNA, and the trajectory of wounds. Every angle, every cut, and every mark became part of a narrative puzzle, essential for building the prosecution's case and understanding the mechanics of the crime. In high-profile cases, such details are scrutinized endlessly, both for their evidentiary value and their role in shaping public perception. The emotional weight of investigating a family homicide cannot be understated. Detectives, while trained for such situations, are human. The intimate nature of the crime, the murder of a high-profile couple by someone so close, adds layers of psychological strain. Interviews with first responders often reveal moments of pause, empathy, or disbelief. The human element is intertwined with the scientific process, and investigators must balance their professional detachment with the emotional reality of the tragedy. Meanwhile, the media continued to watch closely, reporting on every movement at the estate. Helicopters hovered, cameras captured the comings and goings of investigators, and social media amplified every detail. In such high-profile cases, the line between crime scene and public spectacle blurs, adding pressure to ensure procedural integrity. Investigators must operate with precision, aware that every action is subject to public scrutiny. As the investigation progressed, law enforcement began to reconstruct the timeline of December 14th in painstaking detail. The sequence of events, from morning interactions to the moment of the fatal attacks, required cross-referencing witness statements, forensic evidence, and Nick Reiner's movements. Establishing motive, intent, and opportunity became the focus, forming the backbone of a case that would later support first-degree murder charges. But even as evidence mounted, questions lingered. Why did the confrontation escalate to such lethal violence? Were there warning signs overlooked by family or friends? Could the tragedy have been prevented? And what role did the physical layout of the estate, the psychological dynamics of the household, and the pressures of fame play in creating the circumstances for this act? These questions, unresolved, would haunt the investigation and the public discourse that followed. The crime scene investigation, while methodical and exhaustive, also revealed a chilling reality. Violence had occurred within a sanctuary. The Reiner estate, designed for comfort, privacy, and family life, had become the site of an unimaginable act. Each room, each hallway, each artifact of daily life now carried the weight of tragedy. For investigators, understanding these spatial and emotional dynamics was critical in reconstructing the events, but for the public, it underscored the stark horror of what had occurred. And just when it seemed that every piece of evidence had been documented, analyzed, and interpreted, a new development emerged, something overlooked in initial reports, a subtle clue that hinted at deeper complexities in the story. This discovery would send investigators back to the scene, reevaluating assumptions, timelines, and theories. The investigation, already intense, became even more urgent and intricate, setting the stage for revelations that would shock the public once again. The crime scene was no longer just a location. It was a narrative, a puzzle, and a symbol. Every mark, every object, and every piece of forensic data told a story about what had happened, who had been involved, and why. Yet, despite the meticulous work of law enforcement, the human questions remained. How could a family so seemingly perfect, so outwardly harmonious, descend into such violence? And how would the findings of the investigation, combined with the viral courtroom reaction, shape public perception of Nick Reiner in the weeks, months, and years to come? But the most shocking details, the revelations that would truly expose the magnitude of the crime, were still to come. What investigators found next would not only reinforce the severity of the act, but introduce elements that no one, neither the public nor law enforcement, had fully anticipated. The crime scene, already central to understanding the tragedy, would reveal secrets that would change the story entirely, and the world was about to see them unfold. The autopsy report is often the moment when speculation ends and cold, undeniable fact begins. In the case of Rob and Michelle Reiner, the Los Angeles County Medical Examiner's Office delivered findings that confirmed the horror and provided clarity on what the world had only glimpsed in headlines and viral videos. Yet, even as the report clarified the mechanics of death, it also deepened the emotional resonance, exposing the brutality that had struck at the heart of a family, a home, and a legacy. The official cause of death was listed as multiple sharp force injuries. The manner of death, homicide. These clinical terms, while precise, barely capture the human devastation they represent. Each phrase, each technical description, points not just to the fact of death, but to the violence and finality of it. Sharp force injuries are deliberate, controlled, and terrifyingly intimate. They suggest a confrontation that was direct, personal, and filled with intent. The autopsy did more than describe wounds. It mapped the final, agonizing moments of two lives cut short in what had once been a sanctuary. The details of the injuries were meticulously documented. Investigators examined wound depth, angle, and placement, reconstructing the movements of both victim and perpetrator. These analyses revealed the precision and intensity of the attack, as well as the terrifying reality that the act was not accidental. The medical examiner's report became a cornerstone of the investigation, linking physical evidence to the charges against Nick Reiner and providing a legal framework for understanding the sequence of events. Timing was equally crucial. The autopsy report confirmed that the deaths occurred on Sunday, December 14th, the same day the bodies were discovered by their daughter, Romy. This precise timing ruled out speculation about delayed discovery or post-mortem movement. Forensic pathologists cross-referenced body temperature, rigor mortis, and other physiological markers to create a timeline that was essential for both investigators and legal proceedings. Each hour, each minute, added clarity to a day already defined by confusion, fear, and grief. The manner of death, homicide, underscored a chilling reality. Homicide, as a legal and medical classification, indicates deliberate intent to end another human's life. It is the definitive term that separates tragedy from accident, that defines the act as criminal and intentional. In the context of a family home, it carries an almost unbearable weight. These were not strangers, not random victims, but parents, intimately connected to the alleged perpetrator. The classification framed the investigation, reinforced the charges against Nick, and deepened the public's fascination with the case. Beyond the physical wounds, the autopsy provided insight into the violence itself. The positioning, severity, and repetition of the injuries suggested a sustained attack, a confrontation that escalated with intensity. Forensic experts emphasize that such injuries are not typically the result of fleeting anger or accidental contact. They indicate deliberation, force, and persistence. Each mark, each incision, tells a story of the final moments, a narrative that law enforcement and the legal system use to reconstruct events, assign responsibility, and anticipate potential defenses. The autopsy also addressed less visible but equally significant aspects: the physiological responses of the victims, the potential struggle, and evidence of defensive wounds. Defensive wounds, common in violent attacks, can indicate that the victims attempted to protect themselves, creating a chronological map of movement and resistance. In Rob and Michelle Reiner's case, the presence or absence of such wounds helped investigators understand the dynamics of the attack, the interactions between the assailant and the victims, and the sequence of the tragic events. Medical examiner reports are more than just evidence. They are narrative tools that bridge science and storytelling. In this instance, the report provided a factual backbone to a story already laden with emotional intensity and public curiosity. The combination of forensic analysis, precise timing, and clear classification of death allowed both law enforcement and the public to grasp the scale of the tragedy with undeniable clarity. The findings also had a profound psychological impact. For Romy, discovering her parents' bodies was only the beginning of trauma. For the public, the autopsy confirmed fears, transforming speculation into undeniable reality. It made the viral courtroom moment even more poignant. Nick Reiner's silence in court was now contextualized by the violent finality revealed in the autopsy report. The human dimension of the crime, its brutality, and its intentionality became impossible to ignore. Every detail of the autopsy contributed to a broader understanding of the events of December 14th. The medical examiner's observations were corroborated with crime scene analysis, forensic evidence, and witness statements to create a comprehensive picture. The intersection of these elements, the physical evidence, the legal framework, and the human story, formed the foundation upon which the investigation, prosecution, and public perception would rest. But perhaps the most haunting aspect of the autopsy was what it could not capture: the emotional devastation, the human grief, and the psychological impact on those left behind. Reports can describe wounds, categorize death, and provide timelines, but they cannot convey the loss, the horror, or the emptiness that follows when a family is shattered from within. These intangibles, however, drive the public fascination, viral media narratives, and the societal reflection that accompanies tragedies of this magnitude. And even as the autopsy confirmed the brutality, it also raised deeper questions. How did the events escalate to this point? Were there underlying tensions, psychological factors, or pressures that contributed to the act? What role did privilege, family dynamics, and isolation play in shaping the context for tragedy? These questions, while speculative, provide the lens through which the investigation and public discourse would continue. As the medical examiner's report circulated, media outlets reported the findings with precision, balancing factual accuracy with the inherent drama of the case. Headlines emphasized the severity of the injuries, the confirmation of homicide, and the timeline of events. Social media users dissected the details, while legal analysts debated the implications for the upcoming trial. The autopsy became a pivotal piece of the story, connecting the viral courtroom moment, the crime scene investigation, and the broader narrative of family tragedy. Yet, even with all this clarity, the story remained incomplete. The autopsy answered many questions about how Rob and Michelle Reiner died, but it could not answer why. It could not explain the psychological and emotional factors that led to the alleged actions of Nick Reiner. It could not capture the complexity of relationships, the pressures of family, or the internal struggles that culminated in a violent act. And it could not anticipate the ways in which the viral courtroom moment, public speculation, and media coverage would intertwine with these facts to create a narrative that would grip the world. But the investigation would not stop there. The autopsy, while definitive in medical terms, opened the door to further inquiries. Timelines, motives, family dynamics, and forensic evidence that had yet to be fully analyzed. Each layer peeled back revealed new complexities, contradictions, and emotional nuances that would drive the story forward. The medical report was not the conclusion. It was the gateway to understanding the tragedy in its full scope. And as the world digested the autopsy findings, one realization became inescapable. The combination of the brutal violence, the viral courtroom moment, and the shocking revelations from the Reiner estate had created a story that was both horrifying and irresistibly compelling. The public's attention was fixed, the questions multiplied, and the narrative tension was only beginning to build. But what came next? The emerging investigation into motives, personal history, and the subtle indicators that had gone unnoticed would expose truths even more shocking than the medical report itself. The autopsy had confirmed death. The next revelations would challenge everything we thought we knew about family, trust, and human behavior. What drives a son to allegedly commit the unthinkable against his own parents? The question is as haunting as it is complex, and it sits at the heart of the Reiner tragedy. Understanding motive requires delving into the psychological and behavioral patterns of Nick Reiner, a man thrust from private life into infamy in a matter of hours, and examining the pressures, relationships, and circumstances that may have contributed to a catastrophic breaking point. Psychologists caution that human behavior, especially in high-stress environments, rarely conforms to a simple narrative. Motivation is rarely a single factor. It is a convergence of personality, experience, environment, and circumstance. In Nick's case, early life within a prominent family shaped both his strengths and vulnerabilities. Living in the shadow of renowned parents, navigating public expectation, and balancing autonomy with familial loyalty are pressures few can truly comprehend. Yet these factors, while subtle, can compound over years, influencing behavior in ways that may remain invisible until a crisis occurs.